Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, Paris dresses up for the Olympics.
The party's already starting.
Not everyone is happy, though.
Parisians have been complaining about the disruption ahead of the Games. Many have already fled Paris.
So is Paris up for the challenge? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. The last time the French capital hosted the Olympics was 100 years ago.
Paris became the first city other than Athens to host two modern Olympiads when the Games returned to France in the summer of 1924. The Finns made
And though Al Jazeera's Natacha Butler hasn't been there quite that long, she has lived in Paris long enough to know how big a deal this is in France's history.
I have been living in Paris on and off since 2005, but I'm half French. On my mother's side, my family come from the southwest of France, so, France is home.
Well, Natacha, welcome back to The Take. It's always good to have you. I know that you've been following the preparations in Paris for the Summer Olympics, preparation that's been going on for more than 2 years now. How has that paid off? How does Paris look now?
Well, Paris is pretty exciting place to be right now. It's also quite daunting because the Olympics have pretty much taken over the whole of the center of the city. For the first time, the opening ceremony is going to be on the River Seine, which cuts across the center of Paris, dividing the North Bank from the South Bank. That's going to be the opening ceremony there. So there is an enormous amount of security. So everywhere you go at the moment, you've got hundreds of police officers checking, closing roads. There are fences everywhere. There's a whole grey no-go zone where nobody can go until the opening ceremony is over. That's all top secret.
So does that take away from the festive feeling that the Games can bring?
That's a good question, because there's no doubt that it is quite strange to see so many police officers who are armed on nearly every street in central Paris and so many parts of the city, out of bounds to people, fenced off. It is a bit strange, but I think everybody knows it's for a reason. Everybody knows it's in order that we're all safe, that hopefully the Games go smoothly and safely. So there's a little bit of excitement too, because everyone's waiting for this opening ceremony. Nobody really knows what it's going to look like. And there's no doubt that the Games are going to be pretty spectacular. So I think Parisians accept that there has to be high security for this kind of massive sporting event.
Well, the preparations also included some controversial moves. Police have been evicting migrants from makeshift camps in the city. That's not new, but how is that being received by human rights groups?
Yeah, that's right. It's not new in the sense that the Paris authorities do often move migrants or homeless people who are living outside in tents on the street, to different areas and to shelters. But of course, they've probably stepped up their pace, I'd say, in recent months because of the Olympic Games, because they're sprucing up the city. They don't want homeless people. They don't want migrants in tents in the center of Paris when visitors from all over the world are coming. It's all about image. It's all about PR. And that's clear. What human rights groups and activists are saying is, look, this is social cleansing. You can't have a city that's ready to welcome people from all over the world, that is touting its kind of human rights credentials, saying this is going to be an Olympics for everyone, yet sort of sweeping people away out of sight.
You mentioned that this is all about image. And of course, part of that is cleaning up parts of Paris that are iconic, but have not always been the cleanest. I'm thinking of the once filthy Seine River. So you mentioned this historic opening ceremony. Typically, opening ceremonies happen in a stadium. And this will be the first time that one is taking place outside a stadium and on this historic river.
10,000 athletes from around the world will parade down the river in boats, cruising east to west, 3.5 miles downstream through Paris's beautiful bridges.
Preparing Paris for that has been a mega project to clean up the Seine River, which costs $1.5 billion. And to prove that the river is clean and ready for swimming athletes, the city mayor, Anne Hidalgo, took a dip in it in front of cameras.
It's very, very cool to be here, and it was a dream, and now it's real. And after the games, we will have a swimming pool in the river for all the people, for the Parisian people and for the tourists also.
The French president has also promised to swim in it. Would you do it, first of all?
That's a very difficult question for me to answer. I'd have to be diplomatically.
And most Parisians.
Diplomatically, I'd say that yes, maybe I would. Look, the Paris authorities have said that the River Seine is going to be clean enough for swimming. And in 2025, the idea is the legacy of these Olympics is that there will be 5 spots in the river where Parisians and obviously tourists can swim safely. So you think, if they're going to tell us it's safe to swim, I think we have to believe them, because it has taken a decade to clean up the river. And look, even visually, when you're standing next to it, it certainly looks cleaner than it was. But I think there's no doubt that when you talk to people and they're walking along the Seine, most people are like, oh my, no way. No way am I getting in that. It's just like bottles are floating and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, athletes had expressed worries about the safety of the river.
Team USA's Ivan Puskovich is raising concern about swimming in the Seine.
Definitely a big point of anxiety for me, especially since this is my first games.
What have you been hearing about how they're feeling now and whether those efforts to convince them have worked?
Well, I think most athletes are happy to do as they are told by the Paris Olympic authorities. The Paris Olympic authorities are saying the river is clean, it's ready, the scientists are telling us it's okay, we can swim in the river. And I think the athletes are just concentrating on the sport. They're going to get in that river and they're going to swim. It's going to be the swimming leg of the triathlon. You're going to have the swimming marathon as well in the Seine. And I think there's a lot of confidence in the fact that obviously their health and safety is being taken into account.
After the break, how world politics finds its way to the Olympics. So, Natacha, let's talk a little bit more about the athletes and what some of them have been facing in the lead up to the Games. We know that France has barred its athletes from wearing the hijab. So where does that leave Muslim women wanting to compete in the Olympics for the nation?
I think it's important to point out that France has banned not only Muslim women from wearing a hijab, it has banned any religious signs being worn by its athletes. So that could include kippahs, it could include Christian crosses. The reason the French state says that is that they're saying that it's, within secular law in France, athletes representing France are civil servants, and civil servants under secular law cannot wear visible religious signs. And that is why, if you're talking about the hijab, female athletes won't be able to wear them. Obviously, campaigners and human rights activists are saying that's discriminatory. They're saying it's not fair. They're saying, why on earth would athletes be considered civil servants? It's the first we've heard of it. And there's a lot of upset about that. And, there's a well-known basketball player and campaigner called Hélène Barr who wears the hijab. And since October 2023, she's not been able to compete at a high level.
When I started wearing the headscarf, many doors started to close. I'd like the athletes to take a stand during the Olympic Games.
Now, she wasn't necessarily going to be in the Olympics, but she's just one example of the many athletes who feel frustrated because they want to compete for France. They're French, they represent France, but they're being told you can't if you wear a hijab. And even weirder is the fact you're going to have athletes from countries around the world, so many people taking part, and many of those women will be wearing a hijab. So it's a very difficult situation, and you can see why so many athletes feel that this ban on religious symbols for them is unfair.
You mentioned it's because of France's secularism laws, which extend to other religions as well. It's just another example that sports is politicized and always has been, and it's almost impossible to unentangle the two. So keeping that in mind, I want to talk about war and the Ukraine war, Russia's war on Ukraine. Athletes from Russia and Belarus were banned from world sport following the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. But the International Olympic Committee ruled they're allowed to take part in the Games this time under the condition of being neutral. No links to the war in Ukraine or their country's armies. How is that being received?
Well, I think that for a while now, there has been, a lot of people have known that Russian athletes would compete under a neutral flag. And most people thought that was probably okay because that is what the IOC has decided and because of Russia's war in Ukraine. The problem is, of course, is that what we're seeing is a lot of people calling for Israeli athletes to also compete under a neutral flag.
They can come here, but with neutral flag, not with flag of Israel. Israel, the government of Israel, is a criminal war. So
they're angry that Israeli athletes are competing under their own flag because they are saying that Israel's war in Gaza has killed so many Palestinians, and they say that it's unfair that Israeli athletes should be able to compete, and why are they treated the same way as the Russians? To explain what's happening here, what the IOC is saying, the International Olympic Committee is saying, is that they're saying that Russia's athletes are competing under a neutral flag, not because Russia declared war in Ukraine, but because Russia annexed parts of Ukraine and annexed Ukrainian athletes. They are saying Israel has not done the same. The thing is, you're going to have the Palestinian Olympics Committee that has said, but Israel has killed lots of Palestinian athletes. So what's the difference? And nobody's actually been able to answer that question. So there's a real sense of injustice amongst those who believe that Israeli athletes should not be welcome under an Israeli flag.
There were calls by the Palestinian delegation and at least one French lawmaker and activists around the world, as you mentioned, to ban Israel from the Olympics because of that and that discrepancy that we're seeing there.
On Saturday, left-wing MP Thomas Portes from the France Unbowed party addressed a pro-Palestinian rally with the following comments.
I'm here to say that no, the Israeli delegation is not welcome in Paris. Israeli athletes are not welcome at the Paris Olympics.
Do you think we're going to see any hint of it at these games? Are protests being considered or talked about? How will that show up?
Look, it's really hard to tell. There have been protests in which protesters have called for a boycott of Israel, for Israeli athletes not to come at all, let alone perform under a neutral flag. And we may see protests in the next few weeks. It's going to be very difficult, though, of course, because the security is very high. The authorities aren't going to want any form of disruption. And you also have a situation in which once the games start, it's very difficult to change the rules. This is a ruling by the International Olympic Committee. It's a ruling by sporting federations as well. It's not actually a French government decision here. So it'll be hard to see it changing during the games. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, was on television recently in an interview, and he said, look, all athletes are welcome.
Israeli athletes are welcome in our country. They must be able to compete under their colors because the Olympic movement has decided it. It is France's responsibility to provide them with security.
So he's not making any differentiation between the different athletes. And so far, nobody seems to be moving on this question of the Israeli athletes who are already here in Paris under very high security.
So we've talked about several of the controversies facing athletes who were considering or who will be at the games. And now I want to talk about some of the highs. We're talking about a total of more than 10,000 athletes representing 206 countries that are competing in this year's Olympics. What are you looking out for?
Well, you've got new sports this time round, very exciting. Things like skateboarding, breakdancing. And the idea is to try and appeal to more young people, the sort of sports that might get shared virally on social media. The IOC is very aware that youth need to be brought into sport a lot more. And we're also going to have surfing in the Pacific, which is very exciting indeed as well. And I think it's just going to be the atmosphere, because if these games work, they will be spectacular, because you're talking about Olympic Games that for the first time, as you said, are not outside a city, but are taking place within the city.
Beach volleyball will be held right under the iconic Eiffel Tower, fencing at the Grand Palais, an imposing exhibition hall, and archery at the Esplanade des Invalides, a popular park with stunning views.
The city itself of Paris is the main venue. The Eiffel Tower, the Invalides, the Seine River, Concorde, all those places are being used as sporting venues. So that in itself is going to be a real visual feast. And as we've seen it being built over the last, months, and we've seen the scaffolding going up and the seating, I think most Parisians as well, even though most of them have left for their summer holidays because they don't like the traffic and too many police, they all know that it's probably going to be pretty amazing if it gets pulled off and if it's safe.
Well, the closing ceremonies are August 11th, so there's a lot of time in between now and then for stories to come out. But I wonder, Natacha, this is a very big moment in history for Paris. Do you think Parisians are up for the challenge?
Well, for the past few years, people in Paris have been, very disinterested in the Olympic Games, and it's maybe sort of the French spirit to kind of keep a distance from something and say, oh, it's going to be rubbish, it's going to be boring, it's not going to be great. But, as we've got closer and closer to the Games and people have seen, these wonderful temporary stadiums go up around some of those iconic monuments like the Eiffel Tower, and they're seeing the Seine River transformed, I think more and more people are curious and more people are saying, actually, it might be quite nice, it might be quite fun.
Yes, I'm going to watch because there are a lot of countries competing, and that's a good thing because we're also going to discover other athletes, maybe other sports too that we didn't know about. So for me, it's an opportunity to discover a lot of new things.
I'm ready for us to move on to something happy. Until now, we've had more of a negative buzz around the Olympics, what with the terrorist attacks, the traffic, etc. But I think when it starts, we're going to have a great show, and then we're going to have a great competition. And I imagine it's going to be fun.
I was just in a cafe the other day and one of the waiters said to me, I've got tickets for this and I've got tickets for that and I'm really excited. And I was saying, wow, I'd never heard this sort of thing a few months ago. And he said, yeah, everyone I know wants to go to stuff now, but they can't get tickets anymore. So I think there's definitely a sense of excitement, even though at first Parisians were a bit fed up. And look, it isn't easy in terms of moving around the city because it has taken over the city quite controversially. It's pushed transport prices up and things like that. But people know it's temporary. They know it's only for a few weeks. In France, we've had a difficult election. We're still in a situation where we have no government, where there's so much political uncertainty. And I think a lot of people are looking forward to this. They kind of feel like they need a bit of good news, something a little bit festive.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Sarí el-Khalili, Tamara Khandaker, and Sonia Bhagat, with Amy Walters, Veronique Eshaya, Duha Mosaad, Manahil Naveed, and me, Malika Bilal. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.